Welcome to Fraud Expose. I'm your host, Lori Maddock, and today I'll be speaking with cyber fraud experts about sextortion fraud. So, guys, I'm going to let you introduce yourself. Why don't you start?
Hi, my name is Win Win. I'm a founder of Cyber Armor.
Hi, my
Okay,
name
and
is
Jared,
Jared Zarmbinski, and I'm a fraud investigator and financial crimes investigator.
thanks for joining me. We're going to talk about fraud. If you want to avoid fraud or know what to do if you've been a victim, stay with us. We don't want you to get ripped off. So this one is kind of I think, a tough one as far as fraud. But let's talk about sextortion fraud. Jared, can you tell me what is sextortion fraud?
Well, generally, sextortion fraud is commonly known as a classification of schemes that involve sexual activity, whether it's completely fabricated and made up images and, AI video, or if it actually is real, authentic video and photographs of explicitly sexual activity or indecent photography. That doesn't always target celebrities. It can happen to all kinds of people. And basically the use of that to extort people for money, for financial gain, usually with the threatening of exposure or the public release of said images or a video that's used. And it's definitely a crazy category because there's definitely a lot of sociological and psychological components to how that affects victims and other people around them.
Gotcha. All right. Well, how do people get lured away? How do they get attracted to the bad people, the
Mhm.
evil people that procure humans for sextortion fraud? I mean, is it mainly done online?
Yeah. From what I've seen, a lot of it start in one of the connection type of app out there. So dating app where they start, romance with you, chatting, building up, then you start to have that romantic type of, conversation where you send data, right? Send picture, for example, and that's when they start using those data as a leverage to start, sextortion you. So.
Gotcha. Okay. And let me go back to Jared. I mean, how do they figure out who to approach? Are they looking for people online that are weak? I mean, do they send out like 100 of the same message and they see what short, percentage of people or small percentage of people are going to respond? How are they doing it?
Sure. Well, just to back up for a second, there's an important distinguishing between or a distinguishment between sextortion scams and romance scams, but both are similar in that they can start on dating apps and really anywhere on social media. Just if you think about it, the perpetrators are trying to be convincing, and trust is earned first, not financial gain. They want to
Okay.
earn the victim's trust first. So they really can pop up in a variety of ways, but usually it's in a common way that one approaches someone else with any kind of romantic interest or just general attraction. Usually it can be very superficial and just very, shallow overtly, or it might seem a little bit deeper. And depending on how much of a conversationalist the other person is and how much effort that they put into the scheme in terms of the levels at which they go to convince the victim, it can be perceived as a legitimate person or a legitimate relationship. And usually there's a little bit of time involved. Now, to go back to your question, there are examples of sextortion, several cases, in which some of it is, en masse, like you were referring to, where it's there's call centers, there's people in warehouses that are themselves sometimes victims of human trafficking that are given a phone and given the tools to do the job, and they're just cold calling people. They're just, using some set up pre-established fake social media page with images of, some attractive male or female or whatever the ploy is. And they're just constantly messaging people, just constantly reaching out to people, adding people as a friend, adding them as a connection, just trying to start conversations. Hey, I like your pictures, you know, you're really cute. Or it could be, you know, something deeper like, hey, you know, like a shared business interest, or hey, I noticed you're really, you know, into live music or whatever. And they just kind of find like just a small, seemingly, you know, just general conversational entry point like that. And so it's really hard to distinguish sometimes between the reality and the falsification of that at times from the victim. And that's kind of how this can be easy for people to fall into like that. Some of it is targeted, but some of it is totally an en masse operation, and they're just trying to, you know, get to the point where they can start trying to extort money as fast as possible.
Now, let me ask you if you would consider this extortion. And this, I'm going to give you a brief story. About 20 years ago, my friend's 12-year-old daughter, they lived next door to another family with a 12-year-old daughter. She's cut school because she was on MySpace, and it looked like a guy her age was soliciting her to come in from northern New Jersey into Port Authority, New York, which she did without telling anybody, got in the car with the guy who took her home and then raped her. So is that an example of sextortion where, you know, the criminal, the adult is hiding behind social media as maybe someone the same age, right? Because they can make themselves look like they're anybody.
Sure. I mean, that's definitely you know, one of many angles that they could take. I would say that that's more of, you know, a kind of a sexual predator type of case,
Yeah,
a predatory type of case is what it sounds like. But you know, even though you described what essentially was that type of case, that same person could either at the same time before or after the fact, you know, resort to sextortion. He could have during the commission of the sexual crime have installed cameras, you know, in the place where the sexual act occurred and
uh,
taken photos, and then after it's over, just to add insult to injury or to stop the victim from going forward and reporting it to the police to save him or for money or whatever reason, he could then, you know, message the victim back and show them, hey, you know, I have all these recordings, I have these photos. Don't you dare go to the police or tell your parents or anything. Otherwise,
yeah,
I'm gonna, you know, show all your friends at school about this, or I'm gonna, you know, and then that's usually where the threats come into play. And when you're a young person, especially like you know, and when you're threatened with your entire, you know, social circle being made aware of this type of stuff, or depending on your family's background, certain, you know, sexual, you know, activity may be really forbidden or be religiously, you know, apostate, depending on the, you know, the family's beliefs. And so it can really put a lot of stress on the victims. And
yeah,
that's why reporting a lot of this, you know, is kind of difficult to really measure as well in that regard. So what you described, I mean, sounds more like, you know, just like an overt sexual offense, but it can be a Venn diagram thing where, you know, they can then use that with recordings and
yeah.
use that to then further carry on a sextortion scheme as well.
That's why parents have to know what their kids are doing because they don't always know. So a lot of the kids
Yeah.
nowadays are limited, but some are not, and that's what places them in danger. When can you give us some of the warning signs? You know, if what things might trigger you to have a red flag about, you know, this kind of scheme?
For me,
Yeah,
it's tough. It's really tough. I mean, especially during this time where dating is everything is online, right? Using apps to date, so it's very dangerous. And to me, be paranoid. I mean, I wouldn't give any information to anyone online, and you know, so minimum you have to meet them physically, right? Knowing where they coming from before you do that. So if someone friendly out of nowhere just asking for information, if it too much to be true, then you know likely that's a attack. So yeah, just be a little bit paranoid in everything.
got it. All right, and last question I'll ask for Jared is, what do you do if you think you're a victim or you know you're a victim? What do you do?
Well, I can say definitely from the bank's standpoint, we would want you to report that to us. If whatever financial institution that you might be using, if there's transactions involved, monetary transactions involved at all, you'd want to report that. You'd want to report it to the police, and
Definitely.
especially if it's an extortion type of situation where it's, a little bit more of a complicated type of criminal offense than just an isolated event. It's kind of an ongoing series of smaller, parts of that ongoing event, and you would want to definitely report that to the authorities. I would encourage victims to not be afraid. It's really hard to, the problem that I've noticed in my experience with romance scams, which, I would, for obvious reasons, assume extend to victims of sextortion schemes, is the stigma of it, the social stigma,
Yes.
and just how embarrassing it feels like to like I can't believe I fell for this. What was I thinking? Did I really think this was my Romeo or Juliet? Um, and so it can be really hard for them to come forward or to admit it to their parents. I would say just definitely try to find like a trusted person in your family you can speak to about it, or get some counseling, some independent counseling. A lot of counselors are protected, a lot of therapists are protected, and there's secrecy, that client relationship there that's protected by law. And I would encourage people to go to that, and to not be afraid to try to report that initially, and explain it as such, and explain and categorize that as such, as an extortion type of situation. Try to take as many screenshots of the communications as evidence, as possible, and all of that. Speaking as someone who works primarily in the financial industry as a financial crimes investigator and fraud investigator, the usually what we ask people right off the bat to touch to to on what Gwen had just said was, we almost always ask the first question, did you meet this person in person? Did you ever? And that's almost always question one. And we usually ask some other questions about the contact and all of that, but that's usually just to try to figure out what we're dealing with initially. And that's what we would suggest, is just to try to, as soon as you can, be aware of that, report it. If it's too late and the event has already taken place. Otherwise, there's lots of times to get out, because these are schemes that take over, that they transpire over a fairly medium to long term period of time, comparatively speaking to other schemes. And so, just really, taking your time, getting to know people, being really cautious, and looking for those warning signs that Gwen mentioned, and just trying to cover your bases with that. Yeah, I've seen other examples though where people will send video, and they'll make phone calls and sound like the person, and so it's important for people to be aware that there are instances in which it can be really convincing, but meeting the person in person, getting stuff that you can really verify, or looking up their background, things about them. They say they work this place, they say that they went to school here. Well, you can look up a lot of that stuff's public records, and so that's something
Right.
that you would want to try to ask questions and see how much of that they tell you that you can actually independently verify. And so I think that's important for our viewers to know as well.
Yeah, and I myself would fall into more of the paranoid category at this point, where I
A
would be
healthy
like
degree
reverse
of
Googling the
paranoia, I
phone
think, is
number.
good.
Yeah, because you can't trust people. Well, I want to thank both you
I don't
guys
want people to
for,
be scared either, though. I mean, I want you to like
yeah,
live life without being, just completely like shocked all the time and inundated by fear. But at the same time,
exactly.
it's definitely good to have a healthy degree of that, I think, and skepticism for sure.
No, I agree. Oh, and I want to thank you guys for joining me today. We will see you again soon. Thanks for joining us on Fraud Expose.
Thank you.